first violation notice came on a Wednesday in the second week of April, tucked under the wiper blade of the Ford pickup like a parking ticket from a different country. The single dad was kneeling in his driveway with a torque wrench in his hand. His 7-year-old son, Aiden, was sitting on the front step of the small ranch house in a baseball cap that said HOLLISTER Little League, drinking apple juice from a juice box with one bent straw. The notice was printed on cream cardstock. It carried the seal of the Magnolia Point Homeowners Association. It said in formal serif type that the residence at 4118 Cypress Bend was in violation of Section 7, 4B of the Community Standards Code, and that the unregistered automobile presently parked under a tarp in the driveway constituted a substantial eyesore inconsistent with the visual character of the neighborhood, and that a daily compliance fine of $50 would accrue from sunrise the following morning until the vehicle was removed. The single dad's name was Russell Hannigan. He was 44. He was a journeyman framer for a small construction outfit in town and had been a widower for 4 years. He had bought the car under the tarp at a county property auction in November for $2,400 after the original owner, an elderly recluse named Mr. Conroy from Brick Hollow Road, had died without heirs. He had not registered it because he had not yet, in the 4 months he had owned it, finished the work that needed doing under the hood before he could safely drive it to the county clerk's office. He was paying off his late wife's hospice bills at the rate of $320 a week, and would be doing so for another 14 months. He read the notice in his kneeling position. He read it twice. He set the torque wrench down on the bumper. He stood up. The narration steps closer now. It rides Tilda Mercer. Tilda Mercer, 61, was the next-door neighbor and the unofficial Wednesday evening dog walker of the Magnolia Point block. She had been watching from her own driveway through the line of magnolia trees. She had seen the man from the HOA office tuck the notice under the wiper 20 minutes earlier, and she had been waiting since then for Russell to come out and find it. Tilda had moved into the house next door 8 years before Russell had bought his. She had watched him move in with his wife and their 3-year-old son. She had brought a casserole over the day after the wife's funeral and a smaller casserole every Sunday for 9 months after that. She had not asked Russell anything about the car under the tarp. She had asked him, once in February, whether he was sleeping. He had said he was sleeping enough. She had not asked again. She watched him read the notice now. She watched him fold it in half and walk back inside the house with his son. Russell Hannigan came back out 40 minutes later in a clean shirt with the same torque wrench in his hand. He worked on the car under the tarp until 9 in the evening. He kept the tarp draped over the front quarter even when he was working under the hood, because the sky was threatening rain, and because, the witness narration sees later in retrospect, he did not want the neighbors to see what was underneath. The fines started Thursday morning. By the end of the first week, Russell owed the HOA $350 he did not have. By the end of the second week, $700. He did not move the car. He did not respond to the second notice or the third. He worked on it after his framing shifts, kneeling on a folded blanket so his knees would not ache the next morning at the job site. Aiden brought him glasses of water from the kitchen tap and sat on the porch step doing his math homework on a clipboard. On the Saturday of the second week, the chair of the Magnolia Point HOA came over in person. His name was Lawton Fairwood. He was 53. He was a retired insurance adjuster. He drove a clean white sedan that he kept parked in his driveway at a precise 45-degree angle to the curb. He had been chair of the board for 3 years. He came up the walk with a clipboard and a small forced smile. He said, "Mr. Hannigan, I think we can work something out." Russell, kneeling at the front quarter of the tarp, said, "I'm listening, sir." Lawton said, "If you tow it to a storage lot off Highway 19, we'll waive the back fines. You can take all the time you need, it just can't be here. We've had 3 letters from residents." Russell said, "Level, sir, I appreciate the offer. Tow to Highway 19 is $210 one way. I can't pay it this week. I have $840 in back fines. I'm working on the car. I'll be done in 12 days. Lawton said, "Mr. Hannigan, the rules apply to everyone." Russell said, "Yes, sir, they do." Lawton said, 12 days is too long. I'll have to ask the board to consider towing it at your expense by the end of next week." Russell stood up. He set the torque wrench on the bumper. He wiped his hands on the rag that hung from his back pocket. He looked at Lawton Fairwood for a long, careful 3 seconds. He said, "Mr. Fairwood, do you remember Mr. Conroy who lived on Brick Hollow Road?" Lawton said vaguely, yes. Russell said he died last fall. I bought one of his cars at the county auction. It came under a tarp. I did not look at it carefully enough at the auction because I had 30 minutes and a numbered paddle and the title was clean and the price was low. I have been working on it on weekends because my son is 7 and my wife is gone and I am trying to be home in the evenings. The car needs 3 more weekends of work. After that I will register it and drive it to the county clerk's office. After that I will sell it to a man in Asheville who has been writing me letters for 2 months because he saw a photograph of the front fender in a private listing. One of the auction house clerks emailed him without my permission. He paused. The man in Asheville offered me $300,000 2 weeks ago. I told him no. He offered me $320,000. I told him no. He is flying in on a Wednesday in 2 weeks to look at it in my driveway. If the car is not in my driveway, I will lose the offer. If you tow it, sir, I will sue the association for the difference. Lawton Fairwood said very quietly, I beg your pardon. Russell said, I would prefer not to. The narration says what Lawton sees. He sees Russell Hannigan in a clean cotton t-shirt and a tool belt and a frayed baseball cap, kneeling beside a car under a tarp in a driveway in Magnolia Point. He sees a folded HOA violation notice tucked under the windshield wiper. He sees a 7-year-old boy on the porch step with a math worksheet on a clipboard. He sees, for the first time, the curve of the front fender visible at the corner of the tarp. It is a curve he does not know. He stares at it for 10 seconds. He says, Mr. Hannigan, may I see it? Russell says, no, sir, not until the man from Asheville sees it on Wednesday. Lawton Fairwood nods slowly. He says, I'll speak to the board on Monday. He walks back down the walk to his clean white sedan. The witness narration sees what happens between then and Wednesday. The HOA board met on Monday. Lawton Fairwood, in a 15-minute opening statement, recommended a temporary suspension of Section 7, 4B enforcement against the residents at 4118 Cypress Bend. 3 board members protested. He told them level that he had been over to the property himself. He told them he believed the car in question was not what they thought it was. He told them he would personally cover the suspended fines if the resident did not, in fact, sell the car for the amount he had claimed. The motion carried by 1 vote. On Tuesday, Tilda Mercer brought Russell and Aiden a pot of beef stew. She did not say anything about the car. She set the pot on the kitchen counter and stood at the front door for a moment and looked at him with the steady, warm eyes of a woman who had watched a man rebuild himself in a small house in the 4 years since his wife died. She said, gently, Russell, you're doing fine. He said, thank you, Tilda. She said, whatever happens Wednesday. He said, yes, ma'am. On Wednesday at 10 in the morning, a tow truck and a flatbed transporter pulled up at the curb of 4118 Cypress Bend, driven by a man from Asheville named Whit Donnelly. He was 68. He had been collecting and restoring American automobiles for 36 years. He walked up the driveway with Russell and lifted the tarp off the car for the first time since Russell had bought it in November. Underneath was a 1967 Shelby Cobra Super Snake, factory original, with the chassis number stamped clearly under the front fender. It was one of 2 ever built. The first had been sold to a private West Coast collector in 1968 and lived behind glass in a museum in Reno. The second had disappeared from a private estate in 1979 and had been considered lost for 46 years. It had been in a barn on Brick Hollow Road the entire time. Mr. Conroy, the elderly recluse, had bought it from a defunct dealership in 1981 for $1,900 and had driven it twice and parked it under a tarp in the barn for the next 44 years because his wife had asked him to be careful with their money. Russell Hannigan had bought it at a county property auction in November for $2,400. Whit Donnelly stood in the driveway for a full minute without speaking. He walked once around the car. He knelt at the rear quarter and looked at the welds. He stood up. He walked to the front and looked at the chassis stamp. He took a slim brass loop from his shirt pocket and held it to the steel for 10 seconds. He put the loop back in his pocket. He removed his hat. He said finally, Mr. Hannigan, may I shake your hand? Russell said, yes, sir. Whit Donnelly shook his hand. He said, the offer is no longer $300,000. The offer is $3.8 million. I have a buyer in Texas. He will wire the funds Friday. I would like to load it now. Russell stood very still. He said, I'd like to ask my son first. He walked back to the porch step. He knelt down level with Aiden. He said, Bud, The man wants to take the car. We can use the money to pay off Mom's bills and pay off the house and put a lot away for you. Is it okay if he takes it? Aiden looked at the car. He looked at his dad. He said, polite as a small judge, did you finish working on it? Russell said, I finished the timing chain. I didn't finish the carburetor. Aiden said, okay, but maybe the next man will finish it. Russell said, yeah, maybe he will. Aiden said, then it's okay, Dad. Russell stood up. He walked back down the driveway. He said to Whit Donnelly, it's okay. The narration sees the rest of the morning in clean, wide strokes. The flatbed transporter loaded the Cobra under a fresh tarp. Whit Donnelly handed Russell a hardback contract and a folded check for the deposit. The contract listed the sale price as $3,800,000 even. The witness narration through Tilda Mercer at her front window sees the truck pull away from the curb at 11:45 in the morning with the Cobra strapped down on the flatbed. She sees Russell Hannigan walk back up the driveway carrying his torque wrench. She sees Aiden hand him a glass of water. She sees Lawton Fairwood, in his clean white sedan parked at the curb 3 houses down, watch the flatbed turn at the stop sign. She sees Lawton Fairwood get out of his car. She sees him walk down the sidewalk to 4118 Cypress Bend. She sees him stop at the bottom of Russell's driveway. She sees Russell turn and see him. She sees Lawton Fairwood take off his baseball cap and hold it in both hands. She sees Lawton say, Mr. Hannigan, I owe you an apology. She sees Russell say, no sir, you don't. You did what you thought was right. You came back when you weren't sure. She sees Lawton say, I will be drafting a recommendation to the board this week. I want to make sure 7(4)B is amended. I don't want this to happen to your neighbor. She sees Russell shake his hand. The narration steps a year forward. A year later, Russell Hannigan and Aiden 8 still live at 4118 Cypress Bend. They paid off the hospice bills the Friday the funds wired. They paid off the house in August. They put $2 million into a trust for Aiden's college and for any college Aiden's children might want. They put $600,000 into a fund administered by the Magnolia Point Community Center for emergency hospice support for residents in their first year of widowhood. The fund is called, on the small brass plaque inside the community center foyer, the Conroy Hannigan Fund, for the man who had owned the Cobra for 44 years in a barn, and for the man who had worked on it for 4 months in his driveway. It was Aiden's idea to put both names on the plaque. Tilda Mercer reads at the community center library on Wednesday evenings now. She helps Russell and Aiden bake a casserole for the new widow on Magnolia Point whenever one arrives. There has been one in the last year. There will be more. The casseroles are smaller than the ones Tilda used to bring. The recipe is the same. She still walks the dog past 4118 Cypress Bend on her Wednesday evening rounds. She still looks up when she passes. She still sees a man on his knees with a torque wrench in a driveway that used to make the board nervous. She knows now what the board didn't. She knew it then, too, she would say if you asked her. She just didn't have the words for it until the truck pulled away. Lawton Fairwood is no longer the chair of the HOA. He stepped down at the next election. He keeps his sedan parked at a precise 45 degrees to the curb. He still walks his dog past 4118 Cypress Bend every morning. He waves at Aiden. Aiden waves back. The witness narration closes on the small brass plaque inside the community center foyer. It reads only what Aiden wrote. It reads, for the men who do not throw things away, and for the women who hold the cup of water steady while they work. It does not name the car. It does not need to. The neighborhood does not call the driveway an eyesore anymore. They call it Russell's Place.